Welcome to SpringLaw's Spring Forward Legal Updates webinar series. This series is designed to provide a comprehensive legal overview of key issues related to employment law and human rights in Ontario. SpringLaw is a virtual employment law firm advising on workplace legal issues for employers, employees, freelancers, and executives from a wide range of industries. We hope you enjoyed today's webinar and find it useful and informative. To reach our team, please visit us at springlaw.ca. And now to our presenters.
Good morning and welcome to our Spring Forward Legal Updates monthly webinar series. Today is the second of our 2021 monthly seminars, and today we're discussing a big epic battle between HR professionals and employment lawyers. And hopefully our point today is that it shouldn't be a battle and we should figure out how to keep collaborating together. My name is Lisa Stam. I'm one of the lawyers at SpringLaw, and joining me today is Eric Appleyard, Director of Human Resources Business Advisory at ADP. Now, before I properly introduce Eric, let me just introduce SpringLaw for a sec for anyone who's new to our webinar series. We are a Canadian employment and contracts law firm and have been fully virtual since 2017, before it was cool in a pandemic. For any information on our law firm, please visit our website at springlaw.ca. We have a bunch of resources there, including our award-winning blog, our monthly newsletter, our free guide for employers during COVID-19, our Pivot DIY toolkit full of templates and checklists and info for small businesses who are weathering, the impact of the pandemic, and it's still ongoing. Information about our innovative subscription program for employers and our ebook for employees who have recently been fired and are looking for an alternative to traditional legal services. So that's our law firm. Come and check us out. Okay, Eric, we are so delighted to have you join us today. Eric is from ADP Canada, and I feel like, the whole globe knows who ADP is. You're a global leader in HR, payroll, tax and benefits administration, software and services. They kind of do everything. Eric is currently the Director of HR Business Advisory with ADP. He leads a team of HR business advisors who work with ADP clients to provide HR guidance and best practices to support client operations and HR objectives. Prior to joining ADP, he held a bunch of HR positions in the financial services industry, where he worked with senior leaders to align his business strategies with HR priorities. He has his CHRL designation, and he has both an MBA and an Honors Bachelor of Commerce from the University of Windsor. So he knows his stuff. He's also a very nice guy, and it'll be awkward to battle it out with him on this webinar today. So welcome, Eric, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Lisa. Looking forward to it.
Awesome. Okay, we've got lots to cover, so let's jump in. What we're going to talk about today is the why of why we're talking about this topic, the anatomy of employee oversight, and who does what, practical factors that drive who should do what for an organization, what the great big gray area is, and we'll talk through some of that. How we'll talk through some ideas for optimizing efficiencies, and then any questions. Now, in the chat, add any questions you might have in the chat box, of course, and we'll answer them as we go along if we can. And there's a handout there as well. Feel free to grab the handout during the webinar as well. Okay, the why and the anatomy of the employment relationship. So why this topic today? We want to really provide some practical tips. Until the robots truly take us over, a company really is only as good as its talent and how its talent is managed and motivated and optimized. And it's more complex than ever. Employees are alive to their rights. The internet got invented. We all need to level up our skills to really, and our resources to handle all these more complex problems and issues that are coming our way, and the volume. So we really wanted to get practical today about all of this. And then practically, what are the factors that drive the decisions around who should do what. When do you outsource? Do you keep it internal? Is it cheaper to keep it internal, cheaper to outsource, pull in a consultant, DIY? Do you hire a new person to solve that problem, for example? What's cost effective, and then what's effective, for the workforce as well. So let me hand it over to Eric, who's going to talk through our beautiful Venn diagram here of the anatomy of employee oversight. So over to you, Eric.
Thank you, Lisa. So with this Venn diagram, obviously you sort of see the three circles sort of intersecting as it relates to the employee. And I think it's important to really stress the fact that it really is a partnership amongst all three key parties here. As you can see in the diagram, there's obviously a list of various tasks and functions that each does. But really where I want to start is talking a little bit about the role of the manager. And I think it's important as an HR professional when we work with managers, what we're looking for from that manager. And that really is, to provide that daily direction to that employee. You have an employee that's coming in, they need to have that guidance as to what is it that you're trying to have them do. We also recommend that managers provide SMART objectives. And I know that HR people, we always love acronyms. So SMART standing for specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, time-based. And there's different acronyms you can use, but the point is that a lot of times when we see issues coming in with employee issues is when employees don't have a clear direction of what they need to do, or they don't necessarily have clear performance objectives. And what's important is, in addition to having those objectives, is actually having the manager review those objectives and providing that regular coaching to that employee. So where are they going with this, and how are they going towards their goals, and what are they obtaining? You have to measure the performance, right? I think employees want to know, are they being successful? What is it that they're trying to achieve? And you have to be comfortable with measuring the results of the performance. The other two areas that I will talk about really quickly is, also providing recognition. So we're going to talk a little bit about some of the things that when things go off the side, and when do you need to bring in the lawyers. And usually you bring in the lawyers when things have gone sideways. But sometimes it's better to just avoid all of that by doing some of the basics, as I sort of alluded to. And part of that is providing that employee recognition and supporting that career development. The one thing that I would always suggest, though, is if there is a performance issue, that a manager really does need to take action. And yes, that is the dreaded word of documentation. So you'll always have an HR person coming in and saying, what documentation do you have? So I think it's really important that, as a manager, that the HR folks are supporting in that regards. So we've talked a little bit about the manager. What about the role of HR in this? And obviously, one of the key things that HR needs to be aware of is HR is there to support the business and ensuring that the business goals and the HR goals are aligned. So it's important that managers, when they're talking to HR, that they share what their business goals are, that the HR person understands those goals, because that's the only way in which we're going to be able to support that manager or that business be successful. Be a resource for the manager. So obviously, we don't expect the manager to know all the policies inside and out. We don't expect them to know the legislation or all those practices. That's where we come in, and we're supposed to provide that guidance. And our goal is really to make it simple, in the sense that, if you read the legislation or if you read the ESA, it can be very confusing if you're not familiar with it. So our team of HR professionals, what we're supposed to do is make it that much easier for an employer or a manager to really understand what that's all about. Explain the risks. A lot of times we'll get the phone call saying we want to terminate, or we've got a performance issue, and we want to take immediate action. And part of the HR role is to really explain the risks of whatever action you take. So really sort of saying, what's the the cost benefit of this if you take immediate action, or if you take this course of action. And sometimes our job is really to challenge the business on what course of action they want to take, and that so to have that healthy dialogue and debate. So that's the role of HR in this nutshell. I think then when you talk about the lawyers, really, where do I bring in the lawyers, or where do I want that partnership? Is I want them to be that legal expert. I know, or most HR people have a good understanding of the ESA and the good parameters of it, but the lawyer can go deeper. They can sort of say, hey, this is what the outcomes of taking certain action. What I love about when we partner with lawyers is they tell you straight. They're unbiased. They're not going to get caught in the emotions, because even HR people do get caught in the emotions of a situation, right? They're trying to, they're dealing with an issue. They get wrapped up in it. The manager's emotional about a certain situation. The HR person, gets caught up in that. But the lawyer, they can come in and say, look, yeah, you can do this, but here's the risks. Unbiased. Don't really. They're not really concerned about the politics of the situation, the feelings within the situation. They're really just going to tell you straight. And the other piece, two things I sort of see is where a lawyer really comes in is that they can take the best of intentions of all parties and put it into a legal document that everyone understands. Because we get into situations where he said, she said, we get into situations where you're thinking of contracts and everyone goes in with, oh, let's make sure this is all going to work out and we're sure it works out. But that lawyer can say, take that complex sort of conversation and put it in a framework that is going to make sure that everyone really sort of understands what their commitments are. And I always use my lawyers as a coach. They're there to guide me. So, again, the Venn diagram provides a lot of the overview, but I think, from my perspective, that some of these other things that are really where, the partnership between manager, lawyer, and HR is really important. And it's all for the betterment of the organization and the employee. So those are my sort of takes on that. Lisa, I don't know if you have anything you'd want to add or comment on.
Ideally, there is no pink circle, right? I think every business strives to have a just manager and HR with the employee in the middle, and the pink is only worst case scenario. So I think that I need to acknowledge that up front, that it's not ideal to, I think if an organization is having to pull a lawyer in for every situation, then I would say invest in time on training your team internally for sure. I think probably one of the biggest roles I feel like I have when I'm pulled into a matter is that outside set of eyes. I don't know the person involved. I don't know the employee. I certainly am not someone who wants to, depersonalize everything, but I do think, for example, if it's an employee who's had a history of just not being a nice person, that doesn't mean they necessarily can be fired right now because they did one bad thing, right? So for lawyers, our role is to really think about evidence. We're thinking about how are we going to position this information in front of a judge? What leverage does this employer have? And are the facts really going to support any sort of legal remedy here? And a legal remedy can sometimes be very different than what should have happened or what outcome we want as a business. Or what we really wish that employee had done instead, or the manager had done instead with that employee, right? It can be all over the place. And then the other piece I find are, our help with HR, it really depends on the size of the organization. If it's a great big global organization, that HR probably has a legal team behind them as well, and a whole range of skill sets within their HR department. If it's a small employer, that owner operator who might be excellent at their technical thing that they do, that they started the business for, that doesn't mean they know anything about HR or people management in general. And so my role will be, there'll be more of a hybrid of some HR and lawyer if they don't have an HR department. So it really depends on where you are in your business, but ideally you would have your manager / HR / owner do as much of the heavy lifting as you can, and then pull in the lawyer for that outside perspective when you need it.
Absolutely.
Okay, what are some practical factors that drive who does what? So I think cost will be forefront of most business owners' minds. So Eric, let me turn it over to you to talk about the cost structure.
Yeah. What's interesting is, HR people, we always love to have fancy titles, but it's not really about the title. It really is about the level of work. So when you're looking at sort of this pay scale here, typical structure that you'll see in many organizations is, you'll have an HR coordinator. That one might be someone who's providing that administrative support, payroll, benefits, dealing with the letters, and that cost can generally be around $40,000. It depends on location and industry and so forth. You get to the next step where would be that HR counselor, and that is sort of your first level HR generalist. And typically, this is a role where the person's really answering basic HR questions, sort of understanding those policies, guidelines, has a general knowledge of the employment standards, and is there to sort of be that guide for employees and managers in terms of navigating certain things. And again, that the cost there, you can probably looking between 60 to 80,000. And then the next level would be that HR manager. And again, this is where you're starting to get into some of the more meatier stuff where they're looking at comp decisions. So if you're looking at, comp review, they're starting to dig in and make sure that you've got, the relevant compensation factors and total rewards process. They might be doing some of your investigations that come in, depending on the comfort level within the organization and what is the nature of the investigation. I think, it's important to know that in some investigations, you'll want to bring in a lawyer to support just because of the type of investigation it is. Anything where you're dealing with sexual harassment and so forth, it does sometimes benefit to bring someone in as that neutral third party. But other investigations, you would probably bring in the HR manager. And this is probably the level where you're starting to see some of those terminations and supporting managers in terms of how to do a termination, being in those meetings. So that if, again, being that support if something does go off the rails in a termination meeting, that there is that person that can guide the manager on what to say, what not to say, because it can be very emotional, and that is, the HR person's there to support that. And the range on that would probably be about 80 to 100,000 in terms of salary. And then you get to the HR director, probably, simply leading a team of HR, and that can get anywhere between 110 plus. Again, the costs are different. Obviously you look at, I know Lisa, you're going to talk a little bit about some of the lawyerly rates, but I think you have to look at HR from standpoint as an investment, from the standpoint of being able to do some of that heavy lifting that Lisa mentioned, so that you can avoid some of the challenges that can happen if you have employment relation issues that go sideways. I think we're going to be talking about it later on, but like reputational risk and all of those sort of things that can play into it. But that would sort of be a typical structure of within HR and some of the tasks that they would do. So Lisa, we'll turn it over to you to talk a little bit more about the lawyer side of it.
I mean, when you retain a lawyer often, and I will see this continue to evolve, but certainly traditionally it's been on an hourly rate. So but of course in that traditional billable hour model, you sort of get a surprise at the end about how long it took and how much it's going to cost. So, I think we're entering into a new era where clients are pushing back on that and are looking for a lot more cost certainty. Here's my problem. I don't want to spend $20,000 for a $5,000 problem. So, give me another alternative. And so we're seeing, platforms, automation, training, things like investigations. Look for, if you can do it internally because you've got the right people there, and it's a matter that can be done internally. Maybe it's more cost effective to have your internal person do it and just, pull in the lawyer to help coach a little bit or set the framework, or find some sort of DIY kit and training for your in-house person. So it doesn't need to be that you throw the whole problem external to a lawyer. It may be that you unbundle it and send certain things external. I mean, obviously you're not paying the salary of a lawyer for a year. You're pulling them in for the amount of time you need for this task. But the more that you can have your HR who is on salary feed as much information as possible, nicely organized, the proper documentation / evidence over to the lawyer, the more you can save costs for the company overall and just keep the whole process more efficient. Insurance is another piece of all of this that I think is a practical consideration that may drive certain things. Now, I think this is really a last recourse. I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, and this is just a bit of a backdrop, especially for a larger organization that is really maybe turning their mind to more formal risk management type of factors for decisions. But I mean, if the bottom line is lawyers are external and your accountants and these external professionals are heavily regulated. So if we screw up, there's a recourse for our clients. We are in part expensive because we've all got so much insurance that we're obligated to carry, so that if we screw up, then you have recourse as a member of the public. And so there, for certain sort of bet the company type decisions, it may be better to have an outside lawyer help for that background piece. Now, again, last recourse, I definitely don't think a company should use this as their only decision. But something just to be aware of is for if internally your frontline HR person screws up, let's say they accidentally put 100 weeks instead of 10 weeks in a termination letter, the person signs off, you're now on the hook, right, for giving that employee. I mean, we would all look at it and see how we can knock it out, because that's not reasonable. But if a frontline employee messes up, the legal principle of vicarious liability kicks in, meaning the company is just liable for the errors of that employee if they were acting, in their regular course of duty and in good faith and all that stuff. If it's a very senior level person in your organization, then you probably have some sort of director and officer insurance, or increasingly businesses have litigation insurance that can help backstop some of this. So just in terms of thinking about some of the practical drivers for the bigger issues, not the day-to-day stuff, but if a really big nasty thing shows up in your workplace that you need to it's a problem that you have to solve and it's going to be super messy, think through what some of the insurance options might be to help cover off some of that. Eric, just drop in if there's anything on that.
Absolutely. So training, so I think one of the things that I'm going to comment on the HR aspect of it is that, HR education has become much more formalized in the last 20 years. Prior to, and I'm dating myself, I've been in HR longer than I care to admit, but the reality is a lot of people sort of found themselves in HR. They were sort of like, hey, there's a position, you want it, and you sort of, the person would come in and they'd say, okay, yeah, why not? Let's try it out, or it was, viewed as that necessary evil, if you will. But in the last 20 years, you've seen a lot more formalization of what is required in HR, and you're seeing, there are programs now, through colleges, universities, where people are choosing, students are choosing a career in HR, and they're getting the formal education, and they're getting that packaged with that business education of understanding financial statements, understanding the other aspects, the other functional areas that are usually within an organization. So, when you're bringing in someone at, whether you're, small, medium-sized company or even a large company, the insights, the knowledge, the capabilities of the HR people coming in now are, I would argue, are extremely high compared to what they were, even, as I say, 20 years ago. You've got designations that are recognized across the country, but also there are designations globally that recognize, HR professionals having obtained a certain level of competency. And also required to have ongoing professional training. Like, there's continuing professional development that is required for HR professionals who are members of the various associations. And then the other piece, that you're seeing is even lawyers and HR professionals joining up. There's a great program through Osgood, HR law for HR personnel, and it's a great way in which to really sort of understand how the two areas marry. So it is, again, suffice to say is that HR has become much more formalized. It is becoming much more of a recognized profession, and it's continuing to evolve. And I think, through the pandemic, we've even seen that because, a lot of the issues that we're dealing with have been very much HR related, in terms of how to cope and how to get businesses through this. So, Lisa, I don't know if there's anything you'd want to add in terms of that. I know you've done a lot of support with HR people in terms of, providing education and so forth through Osgood and others.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's still some snobbery from lawyers that are, the ones that have been around for a long time or are just old school, no matter how long they've been around, where there's this idea that lawyers know best, and I just that is not the case. We're not trained to do so much of what HR is trained to do, and we're not in the trenches, so we need the context, we need the to understand, you know, what's behind everything. And so I think you really have to work with HR in this. And so, yeah, I think the training has really, it really changed over the last decade or so. There's a couple of questions in the chat. So this one I think is relevant now. When should HR be pulled in, or no, should HR be pulled into any meeting with legal or lawyer? Is there ever a case where it would be preferable to have the leadership or manager deal directly with the lawyer without HR involvement?
So classic answer from an HR person is it depends.
Yeah. That's my answer too.
Yeah, so the reality is that there may be situations where there be investigations, whether it be, you know, very sensitive scenarios with senior leadership teams. So, you know, you're thinking of the C-suite where you may not necessarily want an HR person involved. You might want someone outside. So again, depends on what it is. But there's a lot of times where, you know, having an HR person in a meeting is beneficial, right? Because, you know, I've seen employees get very nervous when you say, hey, this is our lawyer. They know something bad is happening, right? Or they think something bad is happening. And so having someone from HR there to sort of, you know, be that bridge to try and make, you know, read the room and sort of say, okay, what's happening here can be beneficial. So it really does depend on the situation. And the way I approach that is I really have an upfront conversation with the lawyer and sort of say, hey, here's the situation. Here's what the employee is about. Here's the nature of the circumstances. What do you think? And I think together you have that open dialogue. You'll figure out when is it appropriate to have the HR person in or not in the meeting room. So I don't know, Lisa, if there's anything you'd want to add to that.
Yeah, well, I think for most businesses, it's great to have the HR there most of the time, unless they're directly involved somehow in like the complaint, for example, because then you have continuity from one situation to the next within the organization. Where I see the biggest problems arise is when you've got, you know, really siloed departments within an organization, and the HR is really just like a benefits or pension, a payroll kind of processor, as opposed to a proper HR person. And so then all these different siloed departments or areas of the organization don't have continuity from how they're dealing with the situation or disciplining employees or applying a policy across the organization. That I find, and then you lose out on a training opportunity with the HR. They get to sit and hear the legal analysis with the lawyer that can then bring that intellectual capital into the organization. So unless there's a reason, you know, if it's like a harassment complaint against HR, obviously you're going to, you know, deal with that differently. But I for most of the time, it's good to have HR be the key liaison between the organization and their employment lawyer. You know, if it's a small owner operator, it might look different as well, but typically it's good to have them involved. And then, you know, when you're dealing with an actual incident in the workplace, you always want to have at least two people in the room in addition to the employee you're talking to, so that you have a witness. So typically, you know, having that HR, they can be a friendly face, or maybe not, for the employee. It's actually usually a bit terrifying. HR's here. Why is HR here? I know we have another question. I'm going to get to that in a bit when we get through a few more of the slides. Okay, legal exposure is probably, I mean, that's my lens that I'd be looking at why you would bother to send anything external. If it's a $100 problem, who cares if you screw that up? It's a $100,000 problem. You know, invest some time to understand what the cost benefit analysis of that problem is. You know, what is the legal exposure if the whole thing goes south? I think it's try to say that disability law is just such a big area now. Here's some stats from a couple of years ago. So I can only imagine now after the pandemic how much worse it is. But 68% of all cases at the Ontario Human Rights Tribunal in Ontario were employment related between 2016 and 2019. And half of those cases are on the grounds of disability. So, or 55%. So, I mean, a big chunk of what the HRTO does in Ontario is around disability issues in the workplace. So it's alive and well, and you don't need a lawyer to go there. You can really self-rep better than in many forms, because they really do have a good system there to help people. There's resources available. So employers really have an uphill battle in the best of times. So if it's a disability issue, I think that's probably, we'll get to it, but that's probably one of the biggest gray areas, because on the one hand, how you manage that day to day is very much HR, but the legal exposure of that is probably one of your highest gray areas. Other common common employment law court cases, just to get a sense of where the legal exposure is. Every employment relationship is a contract, right? Whether it's expressed or implied. That is how our common law in Canada interprets it, unlike some of the at-will states in the United States. So even if you haven't got any sort of contract in place, there is a contractual understanding underneath it that if the employer breaches it, it's a legal problem. And so having good contracts and dealing with terminations well are probably the two biggest things. That bookmarks of the relationship are the key things. Disability, and then the executive comp world, we're getting more and more busy with that. But having good contracts in place are really the key things. Eric, I'm going to zip through the next couple because I'm mindful of time.
Yeah, please go ahead.
There's lots of employee tools out there, some that are amazing, some that are maybe not so good for either party. But it empowers employees. It empowers employees to, they come to the table so much more informed than pre-internet. And so, there's a ton of tools for employees that then empowers them to seek out legal remedies or to push back to HR internally. So I think that's what's leading to a lot of the exposure and why there's just a higher volume. Let's jump into the gray area here. Eric, I'm going to turn it over to you from an HR perspective.
Yeah, so I'll go really quickly, just being cognizant of the time. So, from an HR perspective, I'd say some of the things that I would always recommend to organizations is have a contract template and review it and regularly with your lawyer. There have been a lot of changes that have been happening in terms of what should be included in a contract, and so I'd recommend that having that in place and actually using it, right? I've seen a lot of organizations that will have a template and they never pull it out, and they do the handshake, and again, as Lisa just mentioned, it's if it's still a handshake, it's still a contract. So establish policies and apply them consistently. Like, it's great to have an employee handbook or policies, but if you don't use them, or you don't refer to them, then you might as well not have the policy, because if the situation goes south, one of the questions you're going to be asked, well, how often have you applied this policy? Has it actually been consistently approached in the same manner? And finally, having a discipline process, right? I think having a discipline approach so that you're providing that progressive discipline if there is a situation, or performance management system as well. And then finally, don't be afraid of terminations, but do have an approach. And try and keep the emotions out of it. I know there's the old saying that it's not personal, it's just business, but it is personal. And yes, it is business, it is personal. So recognize that there is any of these situations, they're probably going to be emotions involved, but try to keep it out of it, and go from there. So that's all I wanted to really say on that. Lisa, I don't know if there's anything you'd want to add.
I know that it's 11:02. We will be providing a link for everyone if you wanted to hear if you have to drop off now because our half hour is up. We'll be emailing out the links so you can check that out down the road. But so we can just finish up for a second, Eric, without hammering through. We can take another 5 minutes because people can drop off if they need to and just grab the link after. The gray area here, I think I was just, while you're talking, I was scrolling through some of the questions, and I do see that it's true. HR do learn the law in their certificates and their degrees. I think learning statutes and learning case law are two different things. And I think I do recognize that HR are as good at the ESA as I am. I like that always, and maybe more, and they always know their own collective agreement more than I will, for example, right? And their policy handbook and all of that. But what I think we're good at is taking a weird situation and going and finding weird case law to help understand and analyze how is the court going to likely interpret this, this fact situation, here's what the ESA says, or the Human Rights Code, or here's the statute, and on the face of it, this is what it says. But now there's this little wrinkle here. What about this? Or what about this regulation? Or what is a tribunal case law saying on this? So I think that whole body of common law and how courts are going to interpret legislation is really the core of the gray area that lawyers are good at. And we have all our tools at hand. Our firm has a couple of different AI legal research tools that we use now to help speed up and drive down the cost for clients. But we have those tools in house. And so I think understanding that gray area, they're having all the process and really understanding all of the statutory complexity of this is what HR is great at. But lawyers can help out with the interpretation of all of that. I think that's maybe a big picture distinction. But again, the other gray area for lawyers is that we do not have the factual context. We don't have the cultural context of your organization. We don't understand if this is the way it's always been done. And if that is the case, how do we get around it? Or how do we address that? Or how do we update that? And so there's, that really feeds into the gray area as well. Disability management. Do you have anything you want to say about that, Eric? Because I feel like that really is the hardest. That's just the hardest area right now.
Yeah, no, it is, and I think the key there is, I think, having a mapped out process and really having strong documentation and understanding what are the issues, and being sensitive to the fact that there are a lot of challenges right now that people are facing, and so and really educating managers that the importance of understanding what a disability is and being comfortable with dealing with those situations and having that sensitivity. I think it's really important, because there's been many situations where I've seen managers make an offhanded comment, not thinking about it, and it has come back to haunt them in terms of how they've handled a disability situation. So I think it's really important to have a formal process, have the good documentation, ask lots of questions when getting the information and so forth.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then that's the bridge between HR and the employment lawyer, is documentation and passing that baton over as it becomes evidence, right? And then our lens is always thinking, how do I put this in front of a judge? So when you're writing a letter or an email to an employee, railing against them about, bad attendance, or, why are they so annoying in the workplace, or whatever it might be, that's terrible evidence. Yeah. So, yeah. Helping with that documentation.
For sure, absolutely.
Okay, now what is our final quick topic here? There's a lot of increasingly helpful tools out there for both of us, for both HR and the legal world, one of the key things is to really proactively systematize all the processes and resources and think about where the gaps might be, whether it's a tech gap, a skill gap, a template gap, whatever it might be, and just really proactively systematizing it before everything hits the fan. So a bit of an audit, and then thinking about, do you have these key legal docs in place? Your contracts, your policies, your termination letter and releases. If you even have that core group of key templates, then that will really help systematize everything. And then encourage your managers to use the organization's template. We run into that all the time. It's always a sales department that is always moving a little bit faster than everybody else, and they go up and they just they run a search in the server, and they find something from 3 years ago, and they use that. And meanwhile, we've got all this case law that's knocking out termination provisions now, and so having a system internally to really help optimize that efficiency.
For sure, I would agree with you there.
Any other words of wisdom from you, Eric, on this?
No, I think just having, as they say, just having those and review them, right? I think it's important that they constantly be reviewed, and it's not fun stuff. It's not fun HR work. It's not fun business stuff, but it really can make a big difference when you are in a situation where you're depending on that contract, that policy, or that letter, because it can minimize some of the exposure that you're facing. So I think it is important. It's not only important to have them, but to review them on a regular basis.
And to reach out, right? I mean, ADP has great resources for HR, so that you can retain that third party to call them with all the tricky questions, or just if you need that sounding board. There are lots of resources out there where you can have a third party resource to help out with this. Different platforms now to help automate a lot of this. So I'm always disheartened when I hear of an HR person really feeling on an island in their organization. There's a whole ecosystem out here, and relationship with lawyers that can really help make it a lot less painful. Okay, final takeaways, and then we will let everyone go on to their day as soon as I can get to the next slide here. So, your HR and employment lawyers should collaborate, not compete. That really, and there is that gray area where everyone thinks they know best, but there should just be lots of collaboration there, and then let all these practical factors drive who's going to do what. Math, really. And I say that as a lawyer, and maybe HR has a bit more of a nuance around that, because there's so many more layers to think through. But for me, what's the math here? Again, if this is a $5,000 problem, don't hire me for $20,000 to solve it, unless it has some big ripple effect down the road.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that. I think you got to look at the numbers. I think, but there's also some of those factors that within an organization, in terms of what's the message that's going to be sent in certain scenarios if you don't do it this way or do it that way. But at the end of the day, penny wise, pound foolish, I think is the famous adage that people use, and I think it's important in these situations that sometimes you have to be reminded of that.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, it's 11:10, and I see most people have stuck it out the extra couple of minutes, so thank you very much. We had good attendance today. I know that there are a couple more questions. What I think, in the interest of time, what if we were to do up a bit of an FAQ afterwards, Eric? Unless you have a few minutes and you want to run through.
I'm happy to do them now if that works.
Okay. Okay, so again, we'll be sending out the links, so feel free to drop off if you don't have time. But let's zip through a couple of them. You are a special guest, and I want to make sure that we can get to some of the questions if you do have the extra minute.
Absolutely.
Okay, so I'm not going in any particular order here, but HR is now in a role where it's not really used to, especially with addiction issues. More and more employees today are being terminated because they are deemed to be redundant. Can disability issues and truth be lost by that word now? Can disability issues and truths be lost by that word, by redundant, by just calling it redundant and getting rid of people?
It is interesting because we do see the situations where there may be situations where organizations might say, oh, this is a great opportunity to, and I hate to being the dark side of HR, but take care of some of those situations that you don't want to address properly. And I think the reality is that if you don't have the documentation, if you don't have the facts, you are opening yourself up to exposure, right? So I think, to use this as a blanket get out of jail card, so I don't have to do proper disability management, or I don't have to address certain issues, that's not going to, I think you're going to see that those issues will not go away. And in fact, they'll come back and they'll come back with a vengeance. So I think you have to still have your proper processes, your proper documentation, because I think that, because when you're redundant or someone's being recalled, whatever those situations, there's going to be questions that are asked, right? And it doesn't, former employee doesn't stop them from saying, they said I was redundant, but you know what, I think it's because I had indicated that I had a disability of whatever situation, and you're going to have to be prepared to defend that. So I think it's very important that you have to keep that in mind and not try and just use this as a blanket approach. My 2 cents anyways.
Well, and my lawyer answer to that is that Redundant it can be a useful tool and used for both good and bad, so good and evil. And the reality is, if you are getting rid of, if you're downsizing a whole you're outsourcing a whole department, and there happens to be a person out of even a dozen employees, and one of them has raised disability issues in the past, but you're getting rid of that whole functional department, then they won't have a claim. Right, and so it truly is redundant, and it is a bit of a get out of jail card free. If you cherry pick that person as the only person that you eliminate, then you've got a big problem. Or if there's only 2 people out of 10, and one of them happens to have disability or has raised disability issues in the past, you're looking for trouble. So I think it's context for sure. What are some resources for HR professionals in small, medium-sized companies that do not have regular access to a lawyer? And I swear that I didn't plant this question, because I love this question, but I did not plant it. So thank you to whoever asked it. Eric, if you want to start.
Yeah. So I thank you for the question. I think so. There's our ADP. So I'm going to put it out there that ADP, we do have resources where we have our advisory team that can provide that services in terms of providing insights on legislation and so forth. The HRBA has a lot of good resources as well to provide that insight. And I would say that, SpringLaw, you've done lots of these workshops where you can get that sort of support and guidance in terms of the information that's out there. But so there's a lot of good resources. But as we say, one of our specialties at ADP is working with small, medium-sized businesses in terms of having tools, templates, access to advisors that can really help an organization through those HR challenges and really supporting you in those situations.
Some of it is budget certainty too.
Yeah,
so for
absolutely.
us, that's why one of the big reasons we rolled out the subscription program a couple of years ago is so that HR only has to go and get a budget approved once, right? Once a year for the annual subscription. And then you've got this budget certainty every month. So, we have a subscription program, but, there are other resources like that where the approval process is a little more digestible. It's not having to get approval for every hour of an external vendor. So it's, looking at different ways to just get it into a budget is the other way to get access as for HR specifically. And maybe just our last question here, in-house counsel and external employment lawyer. It is an interesting area and would love to know your thoughts on how that model should work. So why don't I start with that? We work a lot with in-house or general counsel with GCs or the employment lawyer at a larger organization. If it's like a big enough organization to have an in-house lawyer, but not necessarily a giant global one that has a whole, employment department or labor department, often that GC will not necessarily be an employment specialist. They're going to be a corporate law specialist. And so, but they will definitely know a lot of employment law just by nature of the role. So we do often work with GCs. Some of my favorite work is working with the US GCs that have operations up here, because then you get to do that cultural translation stuff with them about our different workplaces. But it really will depend on the specialties of the in-house counsel. And then again, back to things like insurance and resources, and whether they're just overrun, or is this going to likely turn into litigation that you're going to send to your outhouse lawyer in any event. So it is a common relationship, actually, more common than not. Okay, why don't we wrap up then and let everyone go on their day. Thank you very much for joining us today. Eric, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
It's been lovely, as always, to chat with you and to learn from you on all these gray areas. For everyone joining, thank you for sticking it out. I know we're a bit longer than usual today. We hope you will join us for our next webinar, which is in April 21. We do this the third Wednesday of every month at 10:30 a.m., usually for half an hour. Details and a registration link will be posted on our website, or join our newsletter so you'll get updates on when the next one is. If you have any other questions, feel free to just contact us directly. Here's all our lawyers. If you have a HR type of question, feel free to contact Eric directly. I asked him permission if I could put his email up here. He will direct you to the right person. So thank you very much and have a wonderful day. Thanks, Eric.
Thank you.